In 1956, Britain and France invaded Egypt. They had tanks, air support, and the full backing of Israel. Within days, they controlled the Suez Canal. They were winning the war. And then America made a phone call. Not to the Egyptian government, not to the United Nations, to Britain's creditors. Within 48 hours, the British pound was in free fall. The Bank of England was burning through its reserves, and Britain's Prime Minister had no choice but to order a full retreat from a war his military was actually winning. No bombs were dropped on London. No troops invaded British soil. America just threatened to stop supporting Britain's debt. And that was enough to end an empire's last grasp at global power. This wasn't some Cold War anomaly, it was a blueprint. Because somewhere between the end of World War II and today, the nature of control changed. Empires stopped being built with garrison troops and colonial governors. They started being built with interest rates and loan agreements. And if you look closely at the global economy right now, you'll notice something uncomfortable. Dozens of countries are trapped in debt they can never repay. Their central banks hold billions in foreign currency reserves they can't really use. Their policy decisions are influenced by institutions most of their citizens have never heard of. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a system, and it was designed in a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944. The question isn't whether debt is used as a tool of power. The question is how it became so effective that nations would surrender sovereignty without a single shot being fired. Let's rewind to July 1944. World War II is still raging, but the Allies know they're going to win. And they also know the world economy is completely destroyed. So 730 delegates from 44 countries gather at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Officially, they're there to create a new international monetary system. In reality, they're there to decide who controls global finance for the next century. Two men dominate the conversation: John Maynard Keynes, representing Britain, and Harry Dexter White, representing the United States. Keynes proposes something radical, a global currency called the Bancor that no single country controls, a system where trade imbalances are penalized, whether you're in surplus or deficit, true economic neutrality. White has a different idea. Make the US dollar the world's reserve currency, peg it to gold, make every other currency pegged to the dollar, and create two new institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, to manage it all. Guess which plan won? Britain was broke. The war had cost them everything. They owed the United States more money than their entire economy could generate in years. So when White put forward his plan, Keynes didn't really have leverage to negotiate. The Bretton Woods system passed. The dollar became the global anchor, and the IMF and World Bank were born with a very specific mission: stabilize the global economy and fund post-war reconstruction. At least that's what the brochure said. Here's how it actually worked. Let's say you're a developing country in the 1960s or 70s. You want to build infrastructure, roads, dams, power plants. You don't have the money, so you go to the World Bank or a consortium of Western banks. They're happy to lend. The terms seem reasonable: low interest rates, long repayment schedules. The loans are in US dollars, but that's fine because the dollar is stable. It's as good as gold, literally. You take the loan, you build the dam. Maybe you hire a Western construction company because that's part of the loan agreement. The dam gets built. Everything's great. Then the global economy shifts. In 1971, Nixon ends the dollar's convertibility to gold. The Bretton Woods system collapses. Currencies start floating. And in the late 70s, the U.S. Federal Reserve, trying to fight inflation, raises interest rates to levels not seen in modern history. Suddenly, your loan just got a lot more expensive. Remember, you borrowed in dollars. Your revenue is in your local currency. The dollar is now worth more. Interest payments that were manageable are now devouring your national budget. You go back to the IMF for help, and this is where the system reveals its actual function. The IMF will restructure your debt. They'll give you more loans to pay off the old loans. But there are conditions. They call them structural adjustment programs. You need to cut government spending, privatize state-owned industries, open your markets to foreign investment, devalue your currency, remove capital controls. You don't have a choice. Without the IMF loan, you default. Your currency collapses. Your economy implodes. So you accept the terms. And quietly, without anyone signing a treaty or a single foreign soldier stepping on your soil, your economic policy is now written in Washington. This isn't theoretical. It's a pattern that's repeated across continents. In the 1980s, Latin America went through what economists politely call the lost decade. Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, all buried under debt they couldn't service, all forced into IMF programs that required slashing social spending and selling national assets to foreign corporations. African nations fared even worse. By the 1990s, countries like Zambia were spending more on debt repayment than on healthcare and education combined. The loans that were supposed to build their economies had become anchors dragging them underwater. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. A lot of those loans never actually helped the people. The money would get borrowed by a government, sometimes a dictatorship the West supported for geopolitical reasons. It would go into construction projects that enriched elites or foreign contractors. And when that government inevitably fell or fled, the debt remained. The new government, often democratically elected, would inherit billions in obligations for projects that didn't benefit anyone except the previous regime and its backers. But the IMF didn't care who borrowed the money or what happened to it. The debt was still owed, and the conditions still applied. In 2001, Argentina's economy collapsed after years of following IMF prescriptions to the letter. Unemployment hit 25%. Half the country fell into poverty, all to ensure that German and French banks got repaid. The pattern is always the same. Lend to countries that can't afford it, wait for a crisis, restructure the debt with conditions that transfer control. Now, you might be thinking this is old history, developing world problems from decades past. Except the system didn't go away, it evolved. China's Belt and Road Initiative is the same playbook with different branding. Beijing loans billions to countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America for infrastructure projects, ports, railways, highways. The terms look generous until they're not. Sri Lanka borrowed heavily from China to build a port in Hambantota. The project didn't generate the revenue promised. Sri Lanka couldn't make payments, so in 2017 they handed over the port to a Chinese company on a 99-year lease. A literal port on sovereign Sri Lankan soil controlled by a foreign power because of debt. Pakistan owes China over $30 billion. Zambia is spending over half its government revenue just servicing Chinese loans. The debt trap isn't a myth, it's a business model. And it's not just China. Right now, dozens of countries are facing debt crises. Lebanon's economy has collapsed. Tunisia is negotiating with the IMF. Pakistan is on its 23rd IMF program. Even developed nations aren't immune. When Italy's government tried to increase spending in 2018, bond markets revolted. The spread on Italian debt spiked, and Italy quietly backed down, not because voters rejected the plan, but because investors did. Debt gives creditors a veto over democracy. Here's the really uncomfortable part.
This system requires countries to stay in debt. If developing countries actually paid off their obligations, they'd have control over their own economic policy. They could prioritize local needs over export markets. They could protect industries instead of opening them to foreign competition. The system doesn't want that. It needs debtor nations, because debt isn't just about money owed, it's about leverage. Let's talk about the math that makes this permanent. Developing countries need dollars to trade globally. Oil is priced in dollars. Most commodities are priced in dollars. If you want to import anything, you need dollars. To get dollars, you export goods. But the prices of those goods, commodities mostly, are set by global markets you don't control. When commodities